I want to tell you the one question I asked in that place. The one question that came out of me before I even had time to think. Before I understood where I was or what was happening or why everything around me was more real than anything I had ever touched in my entire life. I looked at him and I said, "Where is Muhammad?" And what he did next, not what he said, what he did, is the reason I am sitting here today. The reason I left the faith I was born into. The reason my mother did not speak to me for 14 months. The reason I wake up every single morning and the first word out of my mouth before coffee, before anything, is his name. My name is Tariq. I am 44 years old. I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, in one of the largest Muslim communities in the United States. Islam was not something my family practiced. Islam was something my family was. It was our air, our calendar, our language, our identity, our definition of what it meant to be a good person and a serious man. I did not choose it any more than I chose my name or my face. It was simply what I was. And then I died on a Tuesday afternoon in February, and everything I was got taken apart and put back together as something completely different. I am going to tell you everything that happened, the NDE, the encounter, the question I asked, and what he did when I asked it. The months that followed that nearly destroyed my marriage, my family, and my sense of who I was. And the moment, 11 months after I came back, when I finally understood why he sent me back at all. But I need you to stay with me for all of it, not just the encounter, not just the dramatic part. Because the part that will change you, and I believe something in this story is going to change you, that part does not happen when you think it will. It happens near the end. It happens in a hospital parking lot, and it involves something my 6-year-old son said that I have never been able to explain. Stay with me. Let me tell you who Tariq was before February, because you need to understand that man clearly. You need to see him the way his neighbors saw him, the way his mosque saw him, the way his own reflection showed him every morning. Because the distance between that man and the man I am now is the whole story. I was not a casual Muslim. I want to make that clear immediately. Because some people hear conversion story and they assume the person was already halfway out the door. I was not halfway out of anything. I was one of those men who, when he walked into the masjid, people adjusted themselves. Not because I was arrogant, because I was consistent. I had prayed 5 times a day since I was 9 years old. Not sometimes, not when I remembered, every single day. Morning, midday, afternoon, sunset, night. For 35 years. That is not a small thing. That is the architecture of a life. I grew up in Dearborn in a Lebanese family that had been in Michigan for 3 generations. My grandfather came over in the 1960s. My father was born here. I was born here. But we did not become American the way some immigrant families do, where the culture gets thinner with each generation. We stayed thick. We stayed tightly ourselves. Arabic at home. The mosque every Friday without exception. Ramadan observed seriously, not performatively. Eid celebrated the way it was supposed to be celebrated, with the whole extended family filling a house until you could barely move. I loved that life. I want to be honest about that. I am not going to stand here and tell you that I was always secretly miserable, always quietly searching, always sensing that something was wrong. That would not be true, and this is a story about truth. I was genuinely content. I had a good marriage to a woman named Nadia who was sharp and funny and patient with me in the specific ways that only someone who has loved you for a long time knows how to be patient. I had 2 sons, Kareem, who was 9, and Yusuf, who was 6. I owned a heating and cooling business that I had built from nothing, starting with 1 van and 1 helper 15 years earlier and growing it to 12 employees. I coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings. I served on the board of our mosque's community outreach committee. I was, by every measure available to me, a man who had built something real. I read the Quran every morning after Fajr prayer. I read it the way my father had taught me to read it, with intention, with respect, with the belief that these words were the direct speech of Allah to humanity, and that reading them was itself a form of worship. But here is the thing I have to tell you. Here is the thing I did not tell anyone for years, because I did not have language for it and I did not fully understand it myself. Every time I read the Quran, something in me stayed thirsty. Not the dramatic thirst of a man searching for answers. A quieter thirst than that. A low, persistent feeling, like a sound you hear in the walls of a house that you can never quite locate. I was receiving the words, but something that should have happened after receiving them was not happening. I was not getting closer. I was reading the right words and following the right instructions and doing everything correctly, and yet the distance between me and God seemed to remain exactly the same every single morning. I told myself this was my own failure, that I was not reading with enough concentration, not praying with enough sincerity, not giving enough, not being good enough. That the problem was always me and never the path. I was wrong about that. But it took dying to find out. It was a Tuesday in February, one of those Michigan February days that is just aggressively gray, the sky and the ground the same. Colorless color, the cold, that specific kind of damp cold that gets into you without your permission. I had spent the morning at a job site with two of my guys, a furnace replacement in a house in Westland. We finished around noon. I drove back to the office, ate lunch at my desk, answered some emails, called a supplier about a parts order that had been delayed. Normal. Completely normal. The most ordinary Tuesday of my life until it was not. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, I stood up from my desk and the room tilted. That is the only way I know how to describe it. The room just tilted. I sat back down. I thought I had stood up too fast. I took a breath. I stood up again, and then the pain hit me. It started in my chest and moved down my left arm, and I knew. Every man knows that description. You grow up hearing it and you file it away in the back of your mind as something that happens to other people. And then one day it happens to you, and your body knows before your brain does exactly what is occurring. My body knew. My legs went out from under me, and I was on the floor, and I was looking up at the ceiling tiles of my office, and I was thinking, in the clearest, most focused thought I have ever had, I am not finished yet. I have not finished yet. My office manager found me. She called 911. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. I know this because she told me later. I do not remember the 7 minutes. I remember the floor. I remember the ceiling tiles. I remember that specific thought. And then I remember the light. Not the ambulance lights, not the hospital lights, the other light. I died twice that afternoon. The first time in the ambulance. The second time on the table in the emergency room when my heart stopped for 4 minutes and 11 seconds before they brought me back. I know the exact time because my cardiologist told it to me 3 days later, in the way doctors tell you things that should be terrifying, but that they have said so many times the terror has worn off for them, even though it has not worn off for you. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That is where I went. I need to be careful here. I need to be honest and careful at the same time. Because what I am about to describe is the part that people either believe completely or dismiss completely. And I understand both responses. Before February, I would have been in the second group. I was not a man who put stock in visions or supernatural experiences or stories of the afterlife beyond what was written in Scripture. I was a practical man, a working man, a man who believed in what he could measure. So when I tell you what I experienced, I am telling you as that man, the practical one, the skeptical one. The one who would have rolled his eyes at this kind of story at a dinner table. I am telling you what I experienced, and I am not embellishing it, and I am not softening it to make it more acceptable. I am just telling you what happened. The darkness was instantaneous, and then it was over. That is the best I can do with the transition. One moment I was on a table in an emergency room, and then the darkness happened, and then it was over, and I was somewhere else. The light was the first thing. But calling it light is like calling the ocean wet, technically accurate and completely insufficient. It was not a light that illuminated. It was a light that was also a substance, a presence. It had weight to it without being heavy. It had warmth to it without being hot. Every single cell in my body, if I still had a body, I was not entirely sure, was responding to this light the way a plant responds to sun. Turning toward it, opening toward it, everything in me reaching for it without my permission. And in the light there was a figure. He was walking toward me. And I want to tell you something important about the moment I saw him. I want to tell you what did not happen. Fear did not happen. Confusion did not happen. The thing you would expect to feel when you are in an impossible place encountering an impossible being, that did not happen. What happened was recognition. I had never seen this person in my life. I had no framework for him in my understanding. And yet every part of me recognized him the way you recognize your own name, the way you recognize your mother's voice in a crowd. Deep, instant, prior to thought recognition. My spirit knew him before my mind had any chance to process what was happening. He was calm, completely calm. The kind of calm that is not the absence of power but the fullness of it. The kind of calm that means nothing in existence surprises you or threatens you or exceeds your authority. He walked toward me with that calm, and he looked at me with eyes that I am still not able to fully describe 3 years later, and I have tried many times. His eyes held something I do not have a word for in English or in Arabic. The closest I can get is this. He looked at me the way you would want to be looked at for your entire life and never quite were. Completely seen, completely known, every part of you exposed and every part of you accepted in the same moment. And then he said my name, my full name, the name my mother gave me, my birth name in Arabic, the name only my family used. He said it in a voice that was quiet and that somehow filled everything the way a single note from a tuning fork fills a room. And I said the only thing I could say. I said, "Where is Muhammad? I need to slow down here. I need to make sure you understand the full weight of that question before I tell you what happened next. Because if you did not grow up Muslim, you may not feel in your bones what it meant for me to ask it. Muhammad is not just the founder of a religion to a practicing Muslim. Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, the final messenger, the man whose life is the model for every Muslim man's life. When I prayed in the direction of Mecca, the city where Muhammad was born. When I recited the Shahada, the declaration of faith that every Muslim says, I said the name of Muhammad in the same breath as the name of Allah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. That is the first thing whispered in a Muslim baby's ear at birth. That is the last thing said over a Muslim body at death. Muhammad was woven into the fabric of everything I was. So when I found myself in this impossible place, in the presence of this impossible being, the question that came out of me was not theological. It was not a challenge. It was the genuine cry of a man whose entire identity was organized around one name, looking for that name in a place where it should have been, where everything he had ever been told said it should have been. Where is Muhammad? And he smiled. Not a dismissive smile, not a condescending smile, not the smile of someone who has just won an argument. It was the smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time to answer a question that the person asking it has been afraid to ask for even longer. A patient smile, a warm smile, the smile of someone who is not threatened by the question at all. He did not answer with words immediately. He did something first. He opened his arms. That was it. That was the whole answer in that first moment. He just opened his arms, wide, completely. The way a father opens his arms to a child who has been lost and has finally come home. Not demanding anything, not requiring anything, just open, just available, just present. And I want to tell you honestly what happened to me when he did that. Because I am a 44-year-old man who grew up in a culture where men did not show emotion, where strength was demonstrated through composure, where my own father had never once said the words "I love you" to me in my entire childhood, not because he didn't love me, but because that was not how love was expressed where we came from. I fell apart completely. Something that had been held tightly inside me for 41 years, some knot that I did not even know existed, came completely undone, and I wept. Not the quiet, dignified weeping of a composed man, the deep, convulsive, from the center of yourself weeping that surprises you when it comes, because you did not know you were holding that much. I wept for every morning I had read the Quran and stayed thirsty. I wept for the distance I had felt for 35 years that I had blamed on my own inadequacy. I wept for the specific loneliness of a man who has been religious his entire life and somehow never once felt truly held. And he held me. He pulled me in and he held me. He was wearing simple clothing, the clothing of a shepherd, and he had a staff, and the hands that held me were not the hands of something distant and theoretical. They were real. They were warm. They were the hands of someone who knew me better than I knew myself and loved me anyway. Then he spoke, quietly, simply. He said, "Tariq, I am the one you have been praying toward. You just did not know my name." I pulled back and looked at him. I said, "Are you Isa?" That is the Arabic name for Jesus, the name the Quran uses for him. And he smiled again, and he said, "I am Jesus. And I have been with you every morning, 35 years of mornings. He had been there for every single one. I need you to stay with me, because the story does not end there. I know some of you think that is the moment. Man has NDE, meets Jesus, comes back a changed person. End of story. It was not like that. It was not clean like that. What came after was harder than the dying. What came after nearly broke me in ways that the heart attack never could. And I need to tell you about the woman who was sitting in the hospital waiting room while all of this was happening, my wife Nadia. Because her part of this story is the part that undoes me every time I tell it. She did not sign up for what I brought back with me. And what she chose to do anyway, over the 14 hardest months of our marriage, is the most vivid demonstration of grace I have ever personally witnessed. Stay with me. The hospital parking lot moment is coming, and I promise you when I get there you will understand why I have never been able to tell this story without stopping. Before I came back, he showed me things. I am not going to describe all of them because some of them are private and some of them are not mine to share publicly. But there are 3 things he showed me that I will tell you because they are the 3 things that made it impossible for me to come back and be the same man. The first thing he showed me was myself. Not a flattering version, not a highlights reel. He showed me myself completely, the way a surgeon's light illuminates what is underneath the surface. Every act of pride I had ever dressed up as religious conviction. Every moment of coldness toward my sons that I had justified as discipline. Every time I had used my position in the mosque community to feel superior rather than to actually serve. He showed it all to me, not with condemnation, not with punishment, but with a kind of loving clarity that was in some ways more devastating than punishment would have been, because punishment you can argue with. That kind of clear-eyed love you cannot. The second thing he showed me was what forgiveness actually was. Not the transactional version I had grown up with, where forgiveness was something you earned through performance, through sufficient acts of righteousness, through balancing the scales enough to hope you came out on the right side. He showed me what forgiveness actually looked like from where he stood. It was not a transaction. It was not conditional. It was a gift that had already been given, wrapped and waiting, and the only thing required was to receive it. I had spent 41 years trying to earn something that was already mine. The exhaustion of that realization hit me like a physical weight lifting off. The third thing he showed me was my sons, specifically my younger son Yusuf, who was 6 years old and who at that exact moment was sitting in a hospital waiting room with his grandmother, and who, I was told later, had not cried once the entire time. He had just sat very quietly with his hands folded and his eyes closed. When my mother-in-law asked him what he was doing, he said, "I am talking to the man in the light." He said, "Baba is okay." My 6-year-old son, in a hospital waiting room, talking to the man in the light. He told me I needed to go back. He said it directly and simply, the way he said everything. "Tariq, go back. Your sons need their father." And there are things you are supposed to say that you have not said yet. I did not want to go. I want to be honest about that. The place I was in, that light, that presence, that complete acceptance, there is nothing on this earth that compares to it. Nothing. And the idea of leaving it and going back into a body that had just had a heart attack, back into a world full of difficulty and loss and uncertainty, was not appealing. I will not pretend otherwise. But I thought about Yusuf sitting with his hands folded and his eyes closed. And I came back. I opened my eyes to a hospital ceiling. White acoustic tiles with a small brown water stain in the upper right corner. I have never forgotten that water stain. I see it sometimes when I close my eyes. Nadia was holding my hand. She was looking at my face, and when my eyes opened, she made a sound that I had never heard from her before and have never heard since. It was not a word. It was the sound of a person's whole body exhaling a fear they had been holding for hours. She pressed her forehead against the back of my hand and did not say anything for a long time. I tried to speak. My throat was raw from the intubation, and the word came out barely above a whisper. I said I saw something, Nadia. She lifted her head and looked at me. She knew from my face, before I said another word, that what I was about to tell her was going to change everything. I saw her know it. And I watched her decide, in that moment, to hear me anyway. I told her, quietly. In that hospital room with the machines beeping and the nurses coming and going and the smell of antiseptic and the winter light coming through the window, I told her everything. The light, the figure, the question I had asked, what he had done when I asked it, what he had said, what he had shown me, all of it. She listened without interrupting. She did not look away from my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a very long time. And then she said, in a voice that was careful and controlled, and that I knew was costing her something, she said, "Are you sure it was not just the brain doing what brains do under trauma?" I understood why she asked that. I would have asked the same thing. I said, "Nadia," he said your name. Before I said anything about you, before I mentioned you at all, he said your name. He said you had been faithful, and he saw it. She looked at me for a long time. Then she stood up and she walked to the window, and she stood there for about 5 minutes looking out at the parking lot. And then she came back and she sat down and she took my hand again and she said, "Okay, tell me again, from the beginning." That was the beginning of 14 months that I will not minimize or make pretty for you. They were hard months, real marriage hard, the kind of hard that shows you exactly what you are made of and exactly what the other person is made of, and whether what you built together is real or just a version of real that only works when nothing is testing it. I need to talk about what it costs. Because there is a version of this kind of story that makes it all sound clean. Man has encounter, man converts. Family comes around, everyone lives in peace. That is not what happened, and I think the people who most need to hear this story are the ones who know, from their own experience, that the truth is never that clean. My father found out 3 weeks after I came home from the hospital. I had not planned to tell him so soon. Nadia and I were still in the middle of our own hard conversations, still finding our footing, and I had wanted more time, but my father was not a man who waited for information. He found out from my uncle, who had heard something from someone at the mosque who had noticed I had not been back since the hospitalization. He came to my house on a Sunday morning. He sat in my living room. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he has built with his own hands that is suddenly broken in a way he cannot repair. And he said, "Tell me it is not true." I told him it was true. He left without another word. He did not slam the door. He closed it quietly, which was somehow worse. My father is a man who has always expressed his greatest pain through composure. He did not call me for 6 weeks. When he finally did, it was to tell me that he had spoken to the imam of our mosque, and that I needed to understand what I was doing to our family name and to my son's futures in the community. He said this not cruelly. He said it as a man stating facts that seemed to him to be obvious and inarguable. I told him I understood what I was doing. I told him I was doing it anyway. My mother did not speak to me for 14 months. 14 months. For she lives 12 minutes from my house, and for 14 months, those 12 minutes might as well have been 12,000 miles. When Kareem's birthday came in June, she sent a card addressed only to him, not to me or Nadia. When Yusuf started second grade in September, she sent him a small gift through my sister, again with no message for me. She was not cruel about it. She was a woman maintaining the only boundary she knew how to maintain. But absence is its own kind of statement. My business lost 2 major contracts that year, both with Muslim-owned companies whose owners heard what had happened and decided, quietly and without confrontation, to take their work elsewhere. I understood. I did not blame them. That is how community works. It has its own gravity, and when you step outside it, the gravity does not pull for you anymore. I tell you all of this not because I want sympathy. I tell you because I want you to understand that what I received in that light was worth every single one of those losses. And I also want you to understand that saying it was worth it does not mean it did not hurt. Both things are true at the same time. The peace he put inside me was real, and the pain of what it cost was also real, and I carried both of them together every day of those 14 months. What kept me from breaking was Nadia. I have to tell you about Nadia. My wife was raised Muslim the same way I was. Faith was identity. It was not separable from who she was any more than her name was. When I came home from the hospital with what I had brought back, I was asking her, without fully understanding I was asking her, to consider the possibility that the foundation everything in her life was built on might need to be looked at differently. That is not a small request. That is not a reasonable thing to ask of a person on short notice. She did not convert overnight. She did not have a dramatic encounter or a vivid dream or a moment of sudden certainty. What she did was something harder and I think braver than any of those things. She decided to stay curious. She bought a Bible. She read it quietly, at night after the boys were asleep, the way a woman reads something she is not sure she is ready to have opinions about yet. She asked me questions, hard ones, the kind that showed she was actually engaging with it rather than just tolerating my new direction. She asked me about the Trinity. She asked me about the crucifixion. She asked me about what happened to Muslims who had never heard the gospel and died. She asked me questions I did not always have answers to, and when I did not have the answers I said so, and we sat with the not knowing together. 6 months after I came home from the hospital, she told me she wanted to visit a church. Not commit to anything, just visit. I found a church in our area with a pastor who had worked with Muslim background believers before, someone who understood the specific geography of the journey we were on. We went on a Sunday morning and we sat in the back and nobody made a big deal of us being there. And the pastor preached from John chapter 11, the same passage that Miriam's Bible had been opened to in the Iranian story I told you earlier. I am the resurrection and the life. Nadia reached over and took my hand halfway through the sermon and did not let go. She was baptized 8 months after that first Sunday, in a bathtub, privately, at the pastor's house, with just me and the boys present. Kareem cried. Yusuf did not cry. Yusuf just watched with the same expression he had worn in the hospital waiting room, his hands folded, his face completely settled, as if this was something he had already known was coming. I promised you the parking lot. Here it is. It was 11 months after the heart attack. February again, almost the exact anniversary. I had a follow-up cardiology appointment at the same hospital where I had been taken by ambulance the year before. Nadia came with me. The boys were in school. The appointment went well. My heart had healed better than the doctors had expected, and my cardiologist actually used the word remarkable, which is not a word those men use lightly. We walked out of the hospital together into the parking lot. Same gray Michigan February sky. Same damp cold. I stopped walking. I stopped because I suddenly recognized where I was standing. It was the same parking lot I had looked down at from my hospital room window 11 months earlier, the morning after I woke up, when I was still barely able to sit upright. I had looked down at that parking lot that morning, and it had looked like every other parking lot I had ever seen in my life. Gray, ordinary, flat. I was looking at it now, and it looked completely different. The light on the asphalt was doing something I could not explain. The bare trees at the edge of the lot had a quality to them. Even the cold air had a quality to it that the cold air had not had before. And I realized, standing there, that this was not the parking lot that had changed. This was me, the scales, as my competitor's narrator said. Those scales had fallen. I was seeing the ordinary world with the eyes of someone who had been somewhere else and come back, and the ordinary world was not ordinary anymore. It never would be again. Nadia stopped beside me. She saw me stopped, and she looked at my face, and she said, "What?" I said, "I can see color, Nadia. I mean, I can really see it." She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked at the parking lot, and then she looked back at me. And her eyes filled up, not in a sad way, the other way. The way eyes fill up when something that has been hoped for a long time finally arrives. She said, "Tell me what it looks like." So I told her. Standing in a hospital parking lot in February in Michigan, I described what I was seeing. The blue-gray of the sky, the particular brown of the wet tree bark, the way the light was sitting on the rooftops of the cars in a way I had no words for, but that seemed, somehow, intentional, like everything was lit from the inside rather than from above. She listened to the whole description, and then she said, very quietly, "I think that is what he looks like. I think that is what it looks like when he is in a place." I could not speak after that. I just held her hand in the parking lot for a long time. Two people standing in the cold, figuring out how to carry something beautiful together. That was the moment I understood why he had sent me back. Not to have a testimony, not to tell a story, to stand in a parking lot with my wife in February and see the world the way it was actually made to be seen, and to give her that too. I want to tell you about what happened with my family, because I told you the hard part and I owe you the rest. My mother came back, 14 months of silence, and then one afternoon my phone rang and it was her number, and I answered it and she said, without any preamble, "I want to see the boys." I said, "Yama, come for dinner." She came that Friday. She sat in my kitchen, and she ate Nadia's food, and she watched her grandsons move around the house, and about halfway through the evening she looked at me across the table, and she said, "You look different." I said, "I am different." She nodded. She did not say anything else about it that night. She has not said anything else about it since, but she comes every Friday now. And sometimes, when she thinks I am not watching, I catch her looking at something in my face, with an expression I cannot fully read, but that I think, I hope, is recognition of something she is not yet ready to name. My father is still finding his way. We talk on the phone twice a week, and we talk about the grandchildren and the business and the news, and sometimes we sit in comfortable silence over the phone, the way old men and their sons do. He has not asked me about my faith again, and I have not pushed. I trust the same timing that brought me to where I am to work in him in whatever way it works. That is not passivity. That is just trusting the one who sent me back to keep working in the people I love. Kareem is 13 now. He is asking questions. Good ones. The specific, sharp, intellectually serious questions of a boy who inherited his father's stubbornness and his mother's clarity. I answer what I can, and when I cannot answer, I say so, and we look together. He told me last month that he had been reading the Gospel of John on his own. He did not tell me what he thought about it. He did not need to. The fact that he was reading it was enough. Yusuf is 9 now. Yusuf has never had questions. Yusuf was settled about this before any of us. He told me once, very matter-of-factly, the way 9-year-olds state things that should be complicated as if they are obvious. "Baba, I always knew that man in the light was real. I used to talk to him before you died." I asked him when he had started. He thought about it for a moment and then he said, "I don't know. I just always did. My son, 9 years old. He got there before all of us. The business recovered. Better than recovered. I am not going to turn this into a prosperity testimony because that is not what this is. But I will tell you that the 2 contracts I lost were replaced by 3 others, and one of them came through a man who called me out of nowhere and said he had heard my story from someone in my old mosque community and wanted to give his business to someone who was willing to lose things for what he believed was true. He was not a Christian. He was not a Muslim. He was just a man who respected conviction. We have worked together for 2 years now, and he is one of the finest people I know. I want to speak directly to you now, specifically to you, the one who is watching this because something in the title caught them. The one who is Muslim and has been curious and afraid of the curiosity. The one who is not religious and wonders if any of this is real. The one who grew up Christian and drifted and is watching this from a distance trying to remember why they believed. The one who is in a hard season and just needs to know that the light is actually there. I was a man who spent 41 years praying 5 times a day toward a God he never felt close to. And then I died. And in 4 minutes and 11 seconds I felt closer to God than I had in 41 years of doing everything right. That is not an indictment of anyone's faith. That is not a theological argument. That is just what happened to me. And what happened to me is that Jesus was there. Not as a concept, not as a historical figure, not as a moral teacher or a prophet or a good man who was misunderstood. As a living, present, knowing, holding person who said my full name in Arabic and smiled at my question and opened his arms before he said a single word. He did not answer my question about Muhammad with an argument. He answered it with an embrace. And in that embrace, every question I had been carrying for 41 years was not solved. It was dissolved. Because when you are that held, when you are that known, when you are in the presence of that much love, the questions do not disappear. They just stop being the most important thing in the room. That is what I came back to tell you, not a theology, not a set of intellectual arguments, not a debate I am trying to win. Just this: he is real, he is personal, he is not distant, and he is not transactional, and he is not keeping a ledger of your performance. He came looking for me in a place where I had no business encountering him, and he held me, and he said my name, and he told me he had been with me every morning, all 41 years of mornings when I was reading the right words and feeling the wrong distance. He was there. He was always there. I just did not know his name. If you are watching this and you have that low, persistent thirst I described at the beginning, that feeling of reading the right words and following the right path and doing everything correctly, and still feeling like something essential is just barely out of reach, I want to say to you what he said to me in that light. He is not out of reach. He never was. He is just waiting for you to ask him to show you who he is. Not what you were told about him, not what your tradition says about him, who he actually is. Ask him that. Ask honestly. He loves a sincere question. He has been waiting for yours. My name is Tariq. I am 44 years old. I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, in one of the largest Muslim communities in the United States. I died on a Tuesday in February, and I came back different. I came back with a word for the thirst, and the word is Jesus. Leave me a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what question you have been carrying that you have never said out loud. I read every single one. I will pray for every person who leaves a word here tonight. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I know it was a long road. The best ones always are.